saying something about
Yeah, when you don't
Oh,
have
that's,
anything in the
you
house.
guys know each other.
When
That's right. All right. I'll try to make it within 1 hour, but I don't know if that's possible for me. You both did?
Okay, that's it. That, you know how you like jokes? All right.
Okay. I would have really freaked on that one. Because last year, she and another woman that were married to the same man were in the
That's
class.
Real. Yeah. Oh, I said. I said out of the blue.
All right. Just what the editors want. All right, we're looking at ideas for the fourth house. And the fourth house is probably one of the most misunderstood houses of the entire set of 12 houses. Most people look at it with meaning only one thing and one thing only. We're going to look at it in a lot of different ways. And the first one is somewhat classical, especially if you study horary astrology. Now, the houses that relate to the cardinal signs are called angular houses. And they are usually, in the course of an activity, they usually indicate how things go. So that in a horary chart, things at the onset are the first house. We saw that before. Along the way is what you get from the seventh house. You know, what's going on, you know, happening on the road to where you're trying to get. The 10th house usually represents the end. That is what you're trying to accomplish. If you set out to do something, the 10th house is likely to tell you when it's you know, whether you're going to be successful and what the conditions are going to be if you do accomplish. But the opposite house, the fourth house, is sort of the denouement. It's sort of like after, you know, when the detective gets everybody and brings them all down into the living room and unfolds how he knew that the butler did it. It's all the action is over, but it unfolds things that were entailed in it all along. And so what we're trying to get at with the fourth house is I can blank in the latter part of my life. We're trying to say what a person does in the latter part of their life is indicated, like in retirement or at the end of a project or something like that. That's what is indicated by the fourth house. I'm about to sneeze, which is really going to raise a ruckus with the recording.
And this is the classic?
This is classic, yes.
The classic.
In fact, probably the best person working with all classic but not classical astrology is William Lilly. And the end of the matter is what he would call the fourth house. William Lilly was a great astrologer. So let's take some examples. Like from my life, I have Jupiter on the cusp of the fourth house, and Jupiter is a happy, easy kind of person. And if you had asked me 5 years ago whether you plan to travel in your retirement, I said, no, I don't have any such plans. And Jupiter is the planet that represents long-distance travel and things like that. And in my retirement, I have been doing loads and loads and loads of long-distance traveling. In fact, I even got a letter today for bonus miles. All I have to do is buy a credit card from them with 26.5% interest, and they'll give me 20,000 bonus miles or something like that. But you see, so I used to be, when I would do my courses when I was very young, I was sort of like a Prussian general. Like you had to fill in the blanks and you had to fill them in just right, or that was it. Now, in my latter days, I've become very Jupiterian. In that I can be really relaxed and easygoing. I work myself hard, but I don't work other people. And I am something of an extreme Platonist. In fact, I have the Platonistic illness in some ways. In fact, I like invisible thought a lot, and I like abstraction. And Jupiter in my horoscope is square to Mercury, so that means an excess of abstraction. And my life since retirement has been very, very much involved with abstraction. So this all holds very true to my horoscope at any rate. But at the end of life, just like when we looked at the first house, we said if you have a baby's child, you never talk about the rest of life. You only talk primarily about the first house and the ascendant, because that's what's most germane to that part of life, and that's what you have to work with at that part of life. And that's important. And so when you have an oldster, somebody who's up near retirement age, you want to look primarily at the fourth house, because those are the kind of opportunities that are going to come ripe. If Aries, you have Aries on the cusp of the fourth house, I can start anew in the latter part of my life. Aries always likes to start new things. If Taurus is there, you can solidify. If Gemini is there, you can adapt and do things that different ways than you used to do them. The classic is Cancer, and Cancer represents backward movements and looking back at the past of your life. And so I can retrospect in the latter part of my life if you have Cancer on the cusp. These are just one example. How many people have taken their horoscope and have taken and put many, many, many keywords into the sentences? Not yet. Nobody. Oh, how could you? Here we do all this work in. Leo, I can overcome. If there are things that you haven't been able to overcome for the rest of your life, maybe you can do them finally in the latter part of your life. I have overcome my adversary, probably by outliving them. Virgo, on the cusp of the fourth house, I can introspect in the latter part of my life. And since, there are always illness consciousness, while I sit in the nursing home, I can introspect and turn inward all I want. Libra, which would mean that Cancer would be on the ascendant and would be a softie, and at the end of life they can compromise. Scorpio, resolve. It's a sign of great resolve. I can resolve at the end of my life. For me, Sagittarius, for me it works out perfectly. The key word I have here, it could be any one, but I have transcend. And that's what my life is. I'm able to deal with things that I was never able to work with before in my life just by transcending and rising above them. Historialize with Capricorn there. And maybe write your memoirs or something like that. Aquarius on the cusp of the fourth house, one might let go and not hang on to things anymore. And Pisces, probably meditate or something of that nature. All right, we got that in under 6 minutes, I think, so we're right on par. We should never spend more than 6 minutes on any one of them if we want to be here only an hour. The second sentence reads, blank is central in relating to my subjective parent. And this brings us to something that's very, very difficult. Now, classically, in the past, in history, when we were all creatures of astrology and we all followed astrology willy-nilly because we didn't have the freedom to be independent people, then the fourth house, which relates to Cancer, used to represent the moon. And because the moon is the great mother and nurtures everything. In that same reasoning, in older times, Capricorn represented the father, the strict father time and all of that. And if you entered a profession, you entered the profession of your father. And it was a tradition that was carried on through many generations. But now that we have become independent and we have become free beings, we turn this over. So that in most instances, the fourth house is the fourth house is the father. The 10th house is the mother. And this means that the big decisions in life are made by the mother. The father decides what we're going to do about North Korea and whether we're going to develop alternative fuels like Brazil. And the mother decides what we're going to have for dinner and where the kids are going to go to school and how you're going to dress and all of those inconsequential things, which means your whole life. Now, I find that usually in our society, the mother is the 10th house and the father is the 4th house. But it doesn't always work that way. You have to be on your toes. You just can't take something for granted. You have to ask the person, you have to look into their life and see whether their opportunities to relate to the father are more like the 4th house or more like the 10th house. Now there is a difference between the two houses. The 4th house is very subjective, so that's the subjective parent. The 10th house is the objective parent. Now, like for example, if you have someone that has, say there's a male that has a really strong 10th house, which would indicate a dominating kind of mother. That is the perfect example of a Freudian definition of the etiology of homosexuality. And that is, if one has a strong feminine dominant principle in life, they are likely to identify objectively with that role and then become homosexual. We're talking about a male here, not a female. But sometimes that does happen. But there are many other ways that people become homosexuals, and it's not, it's something that takes place over a number of lives. But the subjective parent is the 4th house. And by the subjective parent, it's the parent that is there as an influence but doesn't take as much of a direct action in your life. You might say in some ways the mother makes the discipline, but the father is the boogeyman. He's the threat that is behind the scenes. And that pretty much works that way. So you see what we're trying to say. If you want to see how you relate to subjectivity in your own life as a result of your relationship with your father or with the subjective parent, if that happens to be the mother, that's what you're looking for when you're looking with this kind of keyword sentence. You're looking at the parent that is most subjective, and by subjective we mean indirect or environmentally rather than direct and coming straight at you. Some keywords we could throw in there. Respect is central to relating to my subjective parent, because if Aries is on the cusp and you don't go with respect, that subjective parent's likely to give you a licking, like it or not. Formality is central with Taurus. All of the earthy signs are formal, but especially Taurus is formal. Gemini, reason. Like the objective parent lays down the law, but you then go to the subjective parent and you reason with them and then you can go back to the objective parent and say, well, Daddy said this is all right if these conditions are there. It's that kind of a thing. The classic is Cancer there, empathy. You feel what your subjective parent has for you. Leo, forwardness. I find very often that people who have a lot of fire or a strong fire presence in the 4th house have parents who are happy-go-lucky. They like to go to the racetrack or things like that. And they encourage a kind of, in a subtle way, they encourage a kind of outwardness and forwardness. Virgo, specificity. Very specific things you learn from the subjective parent. Libra, fairness. Scorpio, rebellion. Sagittarius, ethics. My father is where I got most of my ethical upbringing from, because he was very much a person of high-minded service. He served the Boy Scouts and the church groups and this and that and that. And it wasn't just that he went to those activities, he really lived them. And I'm a believer in the fact that it's not what you're taught, it's what radiates into you from your parents. especially when you're very, very little. You're extremely sensitive. When you're extremely sensitive, the strongest radiant objects in your environment are your parents. And they radiate their being into you, and it takes in ways that you would never realize. Capricorn, diplomacy. Aquarius, ingenuity. A subjective, like maybe I can invent a way to get out of this. Pisces, ceremony. All right, the third sentence reads, this is the one that almost everybody looks at and no other for the fourth house. Domicile. My domicile is. Now the general environment and the general external world is what is indicated by the ascendant. But your personal environment, your nest, the way you make things for yourself, the way you feel cozy and at home is what is indicated by the fourth house. This is very important also in childhood, because in childhood what the home life is a psychological nest or a psycho-spiritual nest. And your family develops its own private or personal mythology to it. And you grow up with your stories and routines and things like that. So that gives you the kind of idea of intimacy of what the domicile is like. Like most people, especially if they have to wear a suit and tie to work every day, like the idea that they can go home and kick off their shoes and walk around in their underwear if they want. And I just saw pictures from one of my old girlfriends from 1969. She showed me a picture of her apartment, and it's filled with kitsch. It's filled with kitsch. And she's got this little thing in that. I couldn't stand to live in that kind of thing. I like a clean, in my private life there are a lot of books. In my little domicile there are a lot of books, but it's neat and it's clean and it's, there's no clutter. But for her, she's a sentimentalist, and she has these sentimental attachments. And she feels like her history, if she can look at something and touch and say, oh, I related to this person this way, and this object is in there, that is an indication of the way she relates to her environment. It is an objective of her personal sentimentality. And that's what we're trying to get at with the domicile. A lot of things enter in. Leos, no matter where Leo is in the horoscope, there's a strong Leo presence. They love big houses. They love mansions. And Leo on the cusp of the fourth house with somebody would feel that they weren't at home in themselves unless they had a mansion or something like that. So if we have Aries on the cusp, my domicile is Spartan, probably because you're not home very much, Lacedaemonian, you have only a few things around there that you grab and run to go somewhere else to go to war. Taurus, my domicile is sturdy. If it isn't made of brick or stone or something like that, it isn't a house. For Gemini, my domicile is multi-use. Now if you want, you can take planets and you can put it in the house also. Like for example, if you put Mars in the fourth house, it's somebody that is real busy about remodeling or being active or things like that. And I found it happen very often that when people have active planets transiting the fourth house, that's when they do a remake of their home or something like that. Cancer, which is the classic again, empathy. Empathy. My domicile is empathetic. It is homey, it is cozy. It's a place that I have a feel for. Leo, my domicile is bright. Virgo, my domicile is neat. Libra, my domicile is airy. Scorpio, obscure. Sagittarius, massive. Capricorn, that one doesn't work in me. Capricorn, frugal. In fact, it would be punishment for me to have to live in a large house. Aquarius, unique, probably with all kinds of electronic gadgets, like Bill Gates with a whole wall that's a television, and he can put any kind of picture that he wants on it. Pisces, symbolic. I bet you he even puts a Microsoft logo up on his whole wall. All right. The fourth house. Fourth sentence for the fourth house. This is one also that you will probably not find in any other class in the world. Because most people don't look at this. The way it goes is, one way of looking at the houses is how they correspond to the signs. So any house that corresponds to a fire sign is when there's an assertion. You assert yourself. Any house that relates to an earthy sign is the kind of responsibility that comes from that kind of assertion. Any house that relates to an air sign, it gives opportunities to solve relational problems between assertions and responsibilities. But before you can start out all over again, you have to wash the table clean. And so the houses that relate to water signs are solving houses. They solve problems. And since the first third of the horoscope is personal, these are personal problems. This is my personal body, my personal assertion in the world. These are my personal finances. And these are my personal relations, either with neighbors or brothers and sisters or things like that. But the fourth house is the solution of very personal problems. Therefore, you look at things like overcoming bad habits. That's something that's completely personal. Or you solve the problems from traumatic experiences. Suppose you're really sensitive and you have an experience when you're young and it impresses itself very strongly on you, and you have a fear ever after as a result of that experience. So the solving of that personal fear and the overcoming of that personal fear is what you look for in the fourth house. So any solution of a personal problem that does not in its basic essence involve any other people, but basically yourself, is what you're looking for with the fourth house. All right, let's take a look here at some examples. Self-assertion for Aries. I solve my personal problems by self-assertion. It means that you're willing to take action on things that are in your personal subconscious. Taurus, determination. If you hang in there and hang in there and hang in there, you'll eventually overcome a bad habit. Gemini, talk. That's one way to get things out that lurk, that are personal problems. Talk therapies are very important in being with a counselor, and very intimate talking, because if you watch yourself as you talk, you can see what the problem is just from what you're saying. There's an observation that takes place right in the process. Playing is we didn't do the Cancer, which is the classic. Brooding. Brooding, yes. Brooding is when you mull over something, when you hold your consciousness on something that isn't necessarily distinct, and you do that until it does hatch. And that is a Cancerian kind of thing. And you solve your personal problems, that you hum over them until they come out and they're clear what they are. Leo, a way of dealing with personal problems, might be playing. If you can play or work it out in play format, then it is simple. It seems easy. For Virgo, deduction. I deduce things about my personal subconscious that I can't see, and from those deductions I can solve the problems. Libra, converting. That is trying to take the problem and see it in a different light. See it from a different point of view. See it from somebody else's point of view. Try to see yourself, was I a slobbering drunk last night? Something of that nature. Destruction. If I have to bring the walls down in order to solve my personal problems, perfectly fine. Sagittarius, abstracting, which is the way I very frequently deal with personal problems. I abstract them and I try to universalize them to some general principle. It's a Platonistic way of dealing with a problem. If you abstract it, and Plato always said, you know, if you put things in the macrocosm, in the big image, they're easier to see and understand. That's because he was a geometer. And if you try to make a small geometric drawing, it's very hard to make an accurate one. But the bigger the one that you make, the more accurate it's likely to be. So if you want to draw parallel lines and you do it on a football field using you know, a compass that's a rope with big chalk on it, you're likely to get a very accurate parallelism. For Capricorn, pinpointing. That is to say, what is the key form of behavior that I need to get at for solving my problems? So Capricorn always pinpoints and gets right to something exact. Aquarius, knowledge. If I know this and this and this and this, that might be very important to me to solve a personal problem. Pisces, withdrawing. You let me pull away from the problem, and if I pull away from the problem, maybe it'll go away. No, that's not the truth. But if I pull away from a problem, the pressure about it might abate, or I might look at it with a different point of view. All right. The fifth sentence says, family ties are likely to be blank. Now, we said that the first house is the physical, the exact personal being. And last week we said that the third house is the relationship with brothers and sisters. And that is how you negotiate fairness and equality in all of the things that you do together with each other. But what we're trying to get at here with family ties, we're trying to get at things where we are actually inwardly connected with other people. Like, for example, the fourth house represents your genetic background. And it's important to have your genetic history. That's, you know, you're tied together with people in this way, and you may be, have a much larger predisposition to a given kind of illness. Another thing is, if you have a common shared mythology in the family, you actually grow into each other. We don't develop our character in a vacuum. We develop our character together with other people. They are the necessary resistance. They are the teachers. There are all these interactions with other people, and in these interactions we become. The most severe kind of interaction with a person for developing character is a sadomasochistic relationship. A sadist can't become a sadist without having a masochist to practice on, which is the source of that famous joke of the sadists, I even forget it. How does it go that the sadist says to the masochist, let me punish you, and the masochist says no. Of course, that gets into all those different layers and reversals and things like that. They say no in order to have the sadist really lay it on and all those kinds of things. But we're trying to see is, you know, like people who live together take on each other's words. They take on each other's facial expressions. And it is those kind of intimate ties that are formed in intimacy and only can be formed in intimacy that we're trying to get at with the fourth house. And that's why this sentence, and that's why, like if you're stuck, and these are, because the fourth house is one of the houses of hiding. Things are hidden from you when they're in the fourth house. The things that are so much part of the family are very, very hard to see. For many years I had battles with my brother, and it was hard for me to see that unlike any other person in the world, my brother and I are very much like each other. And it was hard for me to see that because I didn't want to see that. And that was one of those family ties kind of things. We have one of those families that is very, we love each other, but we're kind of objective about things. And, it's not an icky, sticky kind of family at all. All right, family ties are likely to be with Aries, unbalanced. Aries always breaks up the balances. With Taurus, thick. That, it's adhesive. With Gemini, clear. Just as clear as can be. There's some kind of communication. Cancer, sticky. Yeah, I've had a lot of trouble with the Cancer things. Leo, gay, but not in the sense meaning homosexual. Like the thing that this family likes to do together is play. We like to be happy. Virgo, my ties to the family are likely to be itemized. Every now and then they read the list off. Item number 1, you said this at this time. and that kind of thing. Libra, with in-laws. The family situation is, you know how it is, you get married to somebody and you take on more of the characteristics of their family than your own. Scorpio, repulsive. Sagittarius, happy. And I must say, I had a very happy family. And we just used to love to laugh with each other. Capricorn, strict. Aquarius, distant. And that may even be the source of family problems, is the distance. Pisces, strange. We have these unusual connections with each other. Well, we're a little bit behind schedule, but we're not doing too bad. Number 6, my subconscious memory is permeated with blank. And this is a sentence where filling in the blanks works extremely, extremely well. What we mean by the subconscious memory is the personal breath record memory. That is to say, every time you breathe, you take in the entire atmosphere of everything that's happening. Like, whether I am conscious of it or not, the attitude of every person in this room is being taken into my memory. And things accumulate, especially if they are of a common nature. And when memories pile up by some form of association, they become something like entities within your memory, and they take on a life of their own. And this is what we're trying to get at with the subconscious memory as part of the general subconsciousness. Now, in general, the 4th house is the subconscious. That is things of the world and things of our personal experience that are stored within our spiritual being, but are below the level of consciousness and are not necessarily of universal import. Their importance lies in their personal connection. The 12th house is usually opportunities to be in touch with the superconscious. And by the superconscious, we mean the divine part of our being of which we are not aware. We are, in ultimate reality, we are divine beings. We are gods, but we are unaware of that. And sometimes when we are made aware of it, we don't even know that it's us. We think that it's God of the whole business, not realizing that it is the God within. And the 8th house represents threshold or transitional consciousness. That is, things that come down from the superconscious come through the threshold consciousness, or things that come up from the subconscious come up through the threshold consciousness, or things are placed in either of those. So the subconscious is what you might say an undigested amount of personal experience from this life and from this life only. It may accrue to forms that have been produced in past lives, but it's from this life and this life only. And so you've got all this undigested stuff, and the world is not dead, and memories are not dead. They're alive, and if those memories are charged with emotions or such like that, you build up objects of emotional memory. And that's what we're trying to get at with the 6th sentence. This is especially important if there is a planet in the 4th house, because a planet represents some kind of objectification, or it represents some kind of sense object, or a sense, how would you say it, perceptive organ of consciousness that allows you to be aware of what's going on in your subconscious. All right. Let's take some keywords here. My subconscious memory is permeated with aggression. Maybe one has a subconscious memory where all the aggressive kinds of thoughts come together. Taurus, greed. Gemini, contradictions. I did this, and then I did this, which is different, and then I did that, which contradicts both of the others. At least there isn't so much of a clinging together with a Gemini there. Images. With Cancer. That's very important, because sometimes an image or a picture of something that you see stays with you forever and ever. And that's what we're trying to get at there. Images are very powerful because they're complete. And if you're permeated with all kinds of images, it's you know, your consciousness has all of these impressions about it. Egoism with Leo there. I did this, and then I did that, and then I did that, and wasn't I a grand guy? Those kinds of things you're holding in the subconscious. Virgo, pettiness. Just hangs on. Libra, license. A kind of freeness. Scorpio, lust. Sagittarius, debauch. I think I can remember every party I've ever gone to, because I'm not much of a party person, but those memories do stay with me. Capricorn, fear. Aquarius, wishes. Pisces, otherworld experiences. Now you realize that we're doing more than just making sentences here. The big important thing is that we are trying to understand what kind of opportunities are with each house. And when you have that, you don't need the keyword sentences eventually. You could just look down all of the sentences without putting any keywords in to say, well, is this a matter of this or this or this or this? All right. Number 7 says, I incubate ideas by blank. And this is something that is very much a part of subconscious activity, and it is very personal. The incubation time varies from individual to individual. For example, the 4th house is the house of night dreaming. And in your night dreaming, you are in touch with all those impressions that are in your personal subconscious memory. They are the material that you play on, and that is the material that is undigested. And sometimes you're working things that have been with you since childhood. But dreams can sometimes be prescient. We can see something in the ethers when we're coming back to our body in the morning that we know something that's coming in the future. Now, when that happens, everybody has their own time frame. Like if you see something happening in the future when you're waking up in the morning, you can bet that it'll be this interval of time, or this one, or this one. And when you learn your own track record, you get to sense how far in the future this kind of event is going to be. I used to be about a 6-week type of person. I had a job once that I completely remodeled a printing shop that I was working in. I was working as a bookbinder. And I remodeled that, and about 6 weeks before it was finished, it was in the basement of an administration building, and I opened the door in the dream and looked down into this beautiful new space, which was now bright and clear and clean. And 6 weeks, almost to the day, I opened the door, and it was exactly the experience that I had in my dream. It was, something that I had been working for. And if you begin to understand your own time lag, or your own time advance, you can understand that part of dreams. The same thing goes for the incubatory quality, like in our personal subconscious, where that memory is, in what is called the positive pole of the reflecting ether. At the negative pole of the reflecting ether, we have all of these images of everything that has ever happened to us. Everything. You can see each little thing, and you can step right into the images. But at the positive pole is something like thinking. Like we have thoughts, and we put those thoughts into our etheric brain before we bring them into our physical brain. In fact, if you have ruptures or damage between the physical and etheric brain, you have something like epilepsy. Epilepsy is a breaking of a connection between the etheric brain and the physical brain. But when a thought is splashed into the subconscious mind of the positive pole of the reflecting ether, it ramifies. Like when you're cogitating and when you're concentrating and thinking, you don't have to work out all the ideas. You can just put it into the subconscious mind, and those ideas work out. It's something that you can experience for yourself if you take a nap at an unusual time when you're still quite awake yet. And if you've been thinking on something really hard, you'll get into a state that you're half asleep and half awake. And if you get into the positive pole of the reflecting ether, you can see there are many more other deductions that you never brought through into the physical brain that you could conclude about a situation that you were thinking about. And so that's something like that is what we're talking about. Some ideas you throw into that almost thought machine of the positive pole of the reflecting ether, and they hum along there. And then after a while, they become ripe. And it doesn't necessarily only have to be from the concrete mind. Some of it is from experiences from this world. If you do a lot of reading, if you want a really good example, read the autobiography of Bertrand Russell, all 3 volumes of it. But somewhere in there, you will find that he says that he knows his incubation period. He studies a subject, and he reads on it and reads on it and reads on it, and then he sets it aside. And he knows at exactly what time it will be ripe. And then he'll start writing, and everything will congeal and everything will come together because the associative work and the carrying out of all the details has been done during that incubatory period. even if you don't get anything out of the astrology, just realizing that you have your own incubatory period, you can't take an egg out of the nest before it's ripe to be hatched. And the same thing is true. You can destroy a lot of your creative processes by trying to surface them too soon. But if you have a confidence that when the time is ripe, that they'll come to the surface and you'll be able to work, that fact in itself is an important thing for almost every human being to know. Aries, I incubate my ideas precociously. Aries always tries to force everything. It tries to do everything too soon. Let's have it out. Even if I lose, at least the matter is settled. Mastication, and by that I don't mean necessarily by chewing. I mean chewing it over in your consciousness, working and reworking. Gemini, oscillation. I incubate ideas by oscillating back and forth between two extremes. Cancer, again the cycle, the classic cycles. In fact, Cancer people can tell, according to their relation to the moon cycle, whether they're going to be productive at a given time or not. The ideal would be as if we could become really turned out spiritually and we would always be perennially ripe with something we could be creative at will, but we're not there yet. Or maybe you are, I'm not. Leo, glowing. Meaning to say, when you warm up to an idea or when the coal starts to glow is when you can incubate your ideas. Purification. It's an analytic method for Virgo. It's not this, it's purely this. Libra, liberating. Giving a kind of freedom, sort of like letting go that we saw with Aquarius before. Conjuring. That is, Scorpio likes to get extremely willful, and you can try to will things to the surface out of an incubational period. Sagittarius, enthusiasm. And boy, that really has me. The fire philosophers and the other spiritual people of the Middle Ages found that there were 4 different kinds of enthusiasm, and each one of them brought you to a different level of spiritual unfoldment. In fact, they saw that the whole process of enlightenment was a process of enthusiasm. Capricorn, deep concentration. As long as I concentrate and hold my concentration, I am incubating something. It's very deliberate, very one-to-one objective. Aquarius, spacing out. And that is not meant in a pejorative sense. It means that you just sort of let go, and in the space you let the intuitions play on the incubatory process in the subconscious, and they come out. Praying for Pisces. All right, where are we next? My most subjective attitude is, now in warfare or something like that, objectives are the 10th house, at the top of the horoscope. Because usually an objective is a hill. Because if you command the hill, that's sort of like having your own air force. You're above everybody and you can see everything that's going on in every direction. And so you're in control when you're on top. But when you're looking from the bottom, you're the most subjective. Everybody can see you, but you're sort of down in a well, or you're in a slough of despond. Who is the slough of despond? That was Bunyan, wasn't it? Pilgrim's Progress. Oh, how could you? What? Oh, yeah, likely. What kind of literati are you?
Not the one.
So when we're in our home life, we're very subjective. And in that subjectivity, there's a closeness, and there is a knowing. Everybody in your family knows your weaknesses, and they know how to tweak them, because there is that relaxation in the home life. When you're in the nest, nothing is kept hidden. But when you're in yourself, subjectively all alone, and you can't get outside of yourself, that is what we're talking about, your most subjective attitude or your most subjective kind of experience. That is what the fourth house does. And it's hard to tell always what we're subjective about. It's not an easy business, because if we weren't subjective, it's like we do things unconsciously. If I really wanted to get to know myself, I would probably look at some of these tapes. Because when you look at yourself in an objective fashion, the way other people do, that's the way you overcome the subjectivity. But what I'm trying to get at here is, it's all right to have subconscious viewpoints. It's all right to be very subjective about things. But if you want to have knowledge that you can use, that it isn't all you just within your little womb, you have to be able to rise out of subjectivity. Eventually we won't have a subconscious mind with all kinds of things repressed in it, because we'll have full waking consciousness, and we will be people of character and people of integrity, and if we make a mistake, we'll correct it, and we won't have a big trough of things that need to be cleared up. But until then, we have to realize that we have that, and that subjectivity takes and it twists our consciousness. All right, we're already done. How do you like that? No, I actually have 5 minutes. The next ones we're going to have to do 2 minutes apiece. My most subjective attitude is in doing. Like for Aries rising, meaning to say, I'm active doing my housework, and I'm subjective when I'm doing that, because I'm not thinking about anything, but I'm subjective. Rumination for Taurus, that is when I'm working things over again and again and again. Gemini, cogitation. Unless you transcend to the thinker, to the watcher, you get lost in thinking. You eventually find yourself, but you have to remember who's doing the thinking, because you can get into the subjectivity of thinking, and you work your way out of the woods. Cancer, the classic, and this is probably the most classic of all classics for this evening, is sleep. My most subjective attitude is sleep. Leo, self-arousal. And I don't mean that necessarily in a sexual sense. It is when a person is self-starting, and that when they're going in, I had one friend that used to tell from the lower back, he could arouse himself to energy. He was a performing musician, a soloist, and he could rouse himself into energy and move other people by feeling certain feelings in the small of his back, and then the part that you feel when you're fatigued, you know what I'm feeling, down around the kidneys, that would be when he would self-arouse and be able to go out and do a really great set. Opinionation for Virgo. You're giving your opinion and you're subjective, you're not realizing that it's not something that belongs to the whole world. It may just be aesthetic or aesthetical for Libra. Destructive for Scorpio. You know, I've injured myself more times in destroying things, because you're carrying out other things than what you're doing when you're destroying. And that has to do with those subjective things that lurk in your being. Carefree. When you're light and happy and everything goes along, you're carefree, and you subjectively can realize all kinds of things. recollective for Capricorn. Aquarius is very strange. Aquarius is not a sign that lends itself well to subjectivity at all. And it is its most subjective when it is inductive. It's in the process of inducing so that it forgets itself. For Pisces, repression. It's most subjective when it's trying to hold something back. All right, the next one we won't have a whole lot to say about. Blank real estate may benefit or harm me. Real estate, it's, you know, like when you're dealing with stuff. And stuff not necessarily in the sense of ownership, but in a sense that your existence dwells in it, and it dwells in you. And so for most people, that's owning a house. But it has to do with your relationship to the earth below you. Like, for example, the fourth house in horary astrology has to deal with real estate in a very unusual way. Sometimes it deals with mining and how you deal with what is subterranean or what is beneath you. I have used horary astrology on several occasions for myself and other people in the purchase of homes. And what is important to the real estate, or what is important to it. If you're not selfish about it and you're not trying to take advantage, it is a legitimate thing to do. For example, if you see Uranus in a malefic aspect in the fourth house, it may mean, look out, that house has bad wiring and you're going to have to pay someday for the bad wiring. So your relationship, what is most important to you, for you, to real estate? And for some people that means not having real estate. There's a lot of freedom in that. Blank real estate may be beneficial or harmful to me. New development for Aries. The frontier is disappearing on us. For Taurus, perhaps agricultural real estate is important to me. For Gemini, wooded real estate. This is, again, the classic really comes out, really comes out. Waterside real estate for Cancer. Cancers, more than any other sign of the zodiac, especially fourth house Cancers, like to have waterside property or be near to water. Again, you find that a lot in personals want ads. Like Cancer wants another Cancer to dwell at the seaside or something like that. You run into them. For Leo, mansions. Virgo, Dust Bowl real estate. Libra, open real estate. Some people want to, they don't care whether it's high or low as long as there's an open vista. Scorpio, swamp real estate. I would really like to have Plato's horoscope. There's a traditional one, but I don't know if it's the real one. But when he made the academy, he chose to make the Platonistic academy in a swamp or right next to a swamp. He knew that there were all kinds of creepy things that hung around in low elevations and such like that. But he wanted his students to be able to overcome the things of nature, including gravitationally bound elementals. And so he put his thing right in the swamp. Sagittarius, mountain real estate. Capricorn, mineral or mining real estate. Aquarius, international real estate. Somebody just told me about the possibility of owning some land in South America. Just got an email today. Check out on it. Seaside for Pisces, another watery sign. All right, we're at the last sentence. It's a repeat of something we said earlier, but we usually take the most important one and repeat it for the 10th sentence. And the sentence reads, blank is or are domestic issues to me. Probably everybody knows the biggest domestic issue that never made any sense to me. I can't see it from the other person's point of view. It may be my Saturn in the 7th house, but I don't see why the toilet seat has to be down. If somebody doesn't look before they sit on the toilet, that seems to be reason enough right there for them to learn the lesson. What I usually do is I put the cover down, and that solves all arguments. But then so often the significant other wants something automatic. They just want to be able to go in there and squat and be done in a big hurry, and they don't like having to lift up the cover. But you see what I'm saying? Some things are domestic issues. And domestic issues, you know, like do we leave dishes in the sink? And for some people that is a big domestic issue. I was raised in a family that the dishes were always washed immediately after eating, and because they're easier to wash at that time. And so I'm really big on wash. I sometimes, if I have a hot meal and it's cooling down, I sometimes wash the dishes or the preparation, the kettles and things like that before I eat. So, but you know, domestic issues are domestic issues. You know, do I always have to pick up your socks? See, in that way, I'm the perfect partner. I don't wear socks. All right, you get what I'm trying to say. And sometimes it is one of those subjective things. And it's one of those subjective things that grows on you. If you grow up in a house where most of the members of the household are men, the toilet seat is likely to be up. And you subconsciously think that's the way it's supposed to be because that's what you grew up with. And so you had this subjective, you see what I'm trying to say? It all ties together like that. And a domestic issue is something that brings to consciousness an area where you are subjective and that you're not completely aware of, and if you, in the process of becoming aware, not only just a solution of that issue, you begin to understand what it is like to have the demi-consciousness of doing something without full deliberate waking consciousness. All right. Independence may be a domestic issue. Let me be out with the boys. Diet may be a domestic issue. Maybe you can't eat a meal that big, but I happen to like it and I'm cooking it. Neighbors, for Gemini, might be a domestic issue that's important. Cancer is the classic again. This is a keyword that works out pretty well for understanding of protection. Because you're supposed to be able to relax and be yourself because you feel safe. And the issue of protection is important if Cancer is on the cusp of the 4th. In most cases, you just have to use, if it doesn't work for you, try some other keyword. And, you know, I can't emphasize enough that this is something that you're going to have to work with a lot in order to get the feel of things. Children is a domestic issue for Leo. Virgo, sound. Do we play the radio or don't we play the radio? Peace. Are things pleasant, peaceful, equitable, things like that? Scorpio, veto power. Because truly the parents do have the most to say in the household. But in a collection of people, if it's to be fair to everyone and somebody is not to be hurt, the weakest has to have the ability to veto. if there's going to be a consensus family, an intimacy family, you have to be willing to let a little child, for example, veto. Room. How much space do I get for Sagittarius? Capricorn, privacy. Now that's very different from society to society. If you live in China where it's wall-to-wall people, you have no privacy unless you go into your subconscious. So the ability, you can put that together with some of the other ones. Deep concentration, you can understand that deep concentration is your means to coming to privacy, because nobody can invade your thoughts. You're impenetrable when you're in that kind of deep concentration. See, what we're doing here is we're scratching the surface very, very little. And by putting together these different words and these different sentences in different ways, you understand an enormous amount about life. You understand an enormous amount about personal psychology. This is the thing about astrology. It gives you so many tools to understand life that you don't even have to ever cast a horoscope. If you just work with things like this and come to the understanding of life, it's a wonderful thing. And very often, I find in a lot of astrological sessions working with people, it isn't always an astrological activity. It's just maybe sometimes being able to define the problem without necessarily saying, well, this is the thing to do or something like that. Aquarius, atmosphere. Pisces, variability. Is this going to be like a temple that's constantly always here, or do I always have to adapt psychically to what's going on? And that's it. Well, we kept it down to an hour and 10 minutes. Not bad. We got it. Any questions?